we cannot hate as believers. How can we hate? We needed God's grace ourselves. Who are we to say we're better than anybody else? However, we cannot countenance sin.
It has been 10 years since the American Supreme Court ruled in the Obergefell decision giving homosexual marriage to the United States. And the damage, well, you might not think there is any, but there certainly is. We're going to talk today to the founders of Americans for Truth about homosexuality. Peter LaBarbera has been doing this work for decades, trying to expose the truth behind the agenda we all know as the friendly LGBT, gay pride parade, or whatever you have it. We want to talk today about what that really is. And it's very interesting right now because the whole evil seems to be targeted only at the T of that LGBT moniker, plus the extras that I've left out for sake of convenience. And we're going to find out why that is. Stay tuned for this episode with Peter LaBarbera. Peter, so good to be with you.
Yeah, great to be you. Congratulations on all you've accomplished, my friend.
Praise God. Let's begin as we always do with the sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. So, Peter, it has been nearly a decade since Obergefell. And so I wanted to ask you, with regard to Obergefell, what's been the effect of this ruling on the mainstreaming of gay parenting, the LGBT lobby they've been, campaigning for a decade. What's troubling for me anyway, and we have Doug Mainwaring at LifeSite writing on this very frequently, is that this is mainstreamed into the Conservative Party. You have President Trump, extolling and going out there advocating for homosexual marriage. And that seems to be now just part of everything. What has happened in these past 10 years and what concerns you most?
Well, I think you're spot on, John-Henry. The mainstreaming of that decision effectively said that we've got the imprimatur of the state and attaching it to something as sacred as marriage, homosexuality. This is a behavior which in the Bible is talked about in terms of an abomination. In other words, it's reprehensible. It's talked about in the most stark terms, and yet this liberation movement, as it was called, this gay liberation movement, succeeded essentially through politics, assisted by the media, of transforming this into a sort of a civil rights / human rights issue, which is astonishing. I think it's really one of the greatest shams of the 20th century now into the 21st century. And we've seen it affecting everything from religion to from schooling to youth. We see these astonishing polls now where upwards of 20% and higher of young people identify in some way with the LGBT. Now they add Q and Q plus. We don't even know what the plus fully stands for. LGBT standing for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Q is for queer and questioning, John-Henry. So if you're questioning, you're part of the movement, So I think the Obergefell decision it gave them that aura of respectability. Leading up to that, they took down the sodomy laws in the United States. Remember the great Antonin Scalia, Justice of the Supreme Court, predicted that would lead to the approval of legalization of so-called homosexual marriage. And I always put so-called because, of course, it's not truly marriage. But it was the imprimatur of the state behind this lifestyle, which, of course, now has a further cascading effect of in the field of gay, like you said, gay parenting. Whereas if you can get married, then why can't you have children, right? And so we see now many couples, homosexual couples, adopting children and creating intentionally motherless and fatherless homes, which is not analogous to any other situation, be they divorced homes or single mothers, for example. We can't equate that to the intentionally creating homes that are denying the child either a mother or a father, which is homosexual households. And in addition, giving those children, those captive children, homosexual activists, let's be honest, homosexual activist role models. where homosexual behavior itself is demonstrated as normal to those children. And so in that whole sphere, it's created the acceptance of that. But also, I think the trans movement itself is also a byproduct of this decision, in that homosexual movements, both in Canada, of course, in the United States and Europe, once they achieved this, they needed something else to do with their huge and well-funded organizations that basically were received all the benefit of free media publicity. And where they went with it was, a lot of them went to even more radically towards pushing the transgender agenda. So rather than most organizations shutting down and saying, well, we've got gay so-called marriage, we're going to scale back. No, they just pushed it further into the trans movement, which of course was also done by the media. And then that pushed this entire movement of the gender ideology, which thankfully led to, I think it was a road too far for most citizens. Most normal everyday folks said, no, we cannot countenance boys and girls participating in women's sport, in girls and women's sports. We can't countenance gender ideology and even gender operations being pushed on minor children, and the various aspects of the trans ideology, which have now engendered this tremendous pushback. It's the first time we've ever seen a pushback this strong, John-Henry, as you know. And this has actually helped, ironically, this has helped the Republicans gain power in the United States, whereas even the Republican Party doesn't want to talk about the gay issue anymore. They're, of course, using the trans issue to build their power. And it could, if the Democrats don't relent on this issue, John-Henry, this could create Republican governance for decades to come, because it's appearing now that the Democrats since they're moving left and they're so wedded to the transgender LGBT movement, they don't want to pull back from that. And that's only going to help the Republicans stay in power even longer.
At the beginning of the whole move for power from the LGBT movement in the first place, they very much distanced a group that was part and parcel of themselves, meaning pedophiles, or as they probably like to call it, the Man-Boy Love Association. I remember when they moved to Canada, because Canada changed its sex laws to allow for sexual activity at 14 instead of 16. And so the Man-Boy Love Association headquarters came over to Canada. I remember that so well because Bill O'Reilly had me on his show at the time and asked me, who's behind this move? I told him it was the LGBT activists, and he was ripping mad because he said, you're going to blame it on the gays. That's who it was. But it was funny that even then, way back, this is back in the 2000s, already even O'Reilly factor was trying to be, pro-gay while trying to be against the pedophilia. They were making the big separation then. But now, of course, there's no even question of that. But I'm wondering, it's something you said right before the show started about how the mainstream of the LGBT, the LGs, might be looking to distance themselves now from the transgenders.
Yeah, and we see that now a lot on X and some online. You see even some gay Republican groups separating from the transgender, and it's an entire movement. And I'm always happy to see basically left-wing ideologies fighting amongst themselves. We see it on the right, of course, but in this case, it really requires a retelling, a revisionist history to be created. And that's what I've been busy working on, getting the real history. And you're absolutely right, John-Henry. NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association, with man-boy love being the favored euphemism for the pro-pederasty part of the early gay liberation movement. Now, let's remember, there is no female equivalent, I don't believe, to the word pederasty, which is kind of odd. Why is there a word for man-boy sexual behaviors and not for women-girl? Although there is lesbian pedophilia. But NAMBLA, this sort of bizarre organization advancing the idea that children can consent to sex with an adult man. These are boys. They marched in early gay pride parades. I believe in Boston. I believe in LA. I can't remember exactly which cities, but they marched. And then, of course, the smart and savvy gay activists said, hey, we got to boot these pedophiles out of our movement, else we're never going to get anywhere. So that sort of created this split, and there was a schism. But in the early gay liberation movement, in the 1969 Stonewall, there was this part of the movement was the people who advocated for sexual, quote unquote, relationships between men and boys. Now, you look at some of the early gay activists, like Harvey Milk, for example. Harvey Milk he was in a quote unquote sexual marriage when he was in his 30s with a kid who was a boy who was, I think, 17 years old, John-Henry. So effectively, one of the greatest icons in gay history, Harvey Milk, who was the father of the coming out strategy, which was evil genius, because it said, if we tell everybody we're gay, if I tell you and I tell all my family friends and I come out to my coworkers and everybody I know, then it's going to make homosexuality seem more like there's more people than there are. It's going to create, people will start not wanting to criticize their loved ones who are unfortunately in this lifestyle. And it was a brilliant, evil genius move to popularize homosexuality, which it did. And we're seeing the fruits of it today. And of course, now we see trans people coming out, and we're seeing pansexual people coming out, and name your new perversion, because, evil begets evil. And you can't really, if it's okay for people practicing sodomy to come out, then why isn't it okay for people practicing, say, non-consensual polyamory, which is multiple partner sexual relationships? There's always another one down the road. And of course, the ultimate one is sex between adults and children, pedophilia. But what the truth is that there was this man-boy love segment of the early gay liberation movement. And my research is in covering, this actually dates back to even Europe, the early gay liberation movement, which is in Germany too. There were advocates of man-boy love who also considered themselves gay liberationists. And it went by different names as well in Europe before coming here. And so we have these famous gay heroes who actually, like, for another one is Larry Kramer, who actually made these comments. For example, here's something Larry Kramer said, and I'm going to paraphrase. He said, most gay men look fondly on their first sexual experience as a boy. So you're telling me that most gay men, if they had a sexual relationship with a man, they looked upon it as a good thing because it helped them form their gay identity. These kind of quotes are rife. They're everywhere in the movement. And so, to be honest, in a telling of gay history, you have to admit that there was a large part of the movement, or at least an important part of the movement, that favored these relationships. And the pornography of that era has these man-boy sexual eroticism was part of their early gay erotica in that era. And this can be proved by places like Cornell University are collecting this pornography, and it's there for the telling. But what the gay activists of today have to do is they have to cover that up. And so there's a historian named Lillian Faderman, who's one of the top gay historians. So when she told that Harvey Milk story, guess what she did, John-Henry? There's a part of the Harvey Milk story there was an honest gay journalist, Randy Schultz. Randy Schultz was an honest homosexual reporter, the first major openly homosexual reporter in the United States. And he told the story of Harvey Milk. And he said, Harvey Milk, what happened when he was a boy, his mother sent him to the theater very naively. He was Jewish. She was a practicing Jew, sent him to the theater alone in New York City when he was 14 years old. Well, guess what happened? He was sodomized. He was victimized by homosexual male predators in the theater. And it was a thing that was known to happen at the time. So how do you tell that story today and not basically admit that pederasty was part of the formation of this gay icon's gay identity? Well, here's how you do it, John-Henry. You say that Harvey Milk saw the other men at the theater who were gay, and he realized he was like them. This is how it's told in a book for young people, a young person's version of the Harvey Milk history. So essentially, they're whitewashing the pederasty out of gay history because they know they can't admit that pederasty is part of gay history. And I believe we have to tell this entire story, sordid as it is, because it's very much like abortion history. John Henry, if I said to you, hey, do you want to read this history of abortion by Jane Fonda? You'd say, no, I don't want the Jane Fonda or the Gloria Steinem version of abortion history, because they're pro-abortion. That's what they know. That's what they are. We can't trust that. So how can we trust any gay history that's basically written by and for gay activists? And yet in the world of gay, unlike abortion, where there is a very much thriving counter narrative, of which LifeSite News is probably one of the most prominent in the world, to your great credit, which you will be rewarded about. I hope when you meet Jesus, you will be rewarded for this. There is a thriving counter narrative in the pro-life, which is the pro-life movement, which says we're going to counter the pro-abortion narrative. However, in the gay world, because opposition to homosexuality has been so difficult, and again, LifeSite is to be credited for never compromising in that area, but so many have, as we both know, in the conservative movement. So the problem we face is that there are so few people who even know this history, much less are telling it, that we face a David and Goliath struggle against the massive gay propaganda organ, which is big gay, which is intellectual, the universities, the media, even the conservative world, as you alluded to earlier, has gone gay. I mean, Donald Trump's wife raised money for the Log Cabin Republicans, which is the most prominent gay Republican group in this electoral cycle. So obviously, even MAGA, which I guess I'm part of it because I voted for Donald Trump. I don't support everything they do, but MAGA the Trumps felt it was okay to raise funds for the leading gay Republican group in the middle of the most important campaign that we ever saw for U.S. president. So we have a huge David and Goliath struggle, but if God is my witness, I'm going to try to do as much as I can, because I believe we have to recover this lost history. Otherwise, we're living a lie. And the lie is that this evil transgender movement somehow just in the early, in the 2010s, John Henry, just sprang out of nowhere. This evil transgender ideology that is diabolical and harming children. And we don't know where it really came from. It just kind of sprang into existence. Whereas we know the truth. It sprang into existence from an evil gay liberation movement, which was all about normalizing sodomy, or as the Brits called it, buggery, deviant sex, not as God intended. God created male and female. He created men to be in sexual relationships in marriage with their wives for the procreation of children. That's what creation is. And so two dudes, or two women in a marriage relationship is counter nature, of course, because nature discriminates against homosexual behavior. But of course, God created nature, so it's a movement which is diabolically against God as well. And it may, of course, be politically incorrect for this gay liberation movement to admit that there was a vast pederasty movement that was a part of it, but that's the truth. That's what it is.
Pope Pius XI said, men must look for the peace of Christ in the kingdom of Christ. And he urged that the faithful give public honor to Christ the King so that individuals and states would submit once more to the rule of their Savior. And that is why LifeSite News is raising up the image of Christ the King across the United States. And you can help us reach millions more. Please pledge your support today for these billboards at lifefunder.com/Christ is King.
When you talk about the crushing of dissent on this thing, there is sort of a hero in the movement who fought for traditional marriage, for against the homosexual agenda in schools and everywhere else. And you've been around in this movement for decades now. Tell us about Anita Bryant.
Thank you for this opportunity. Anita Bryant, here's a book by her. I would put her on a pedestal with the great Phyllis Schlafly. She's evangelical Christian. Phyllis Schlafly was a Catholic. But these were two incredibly strong women who fought against the big evils of our time. And what Anita Bryant did was she, first of all, who was Anita Bryant? She was a beauty queen. I think, Miss America running up in the 60s and 70s. And she became the superstar. She was a singer. She was a very popular singer. She was one of the most respected American women of that era. And so much so that Bob Hope, for example, took her on USO tours to sing to the troops. She was a superstar, John-Henry. I don't think I even know how great she was in that respect, but she did achieve this fame and fortune. She was a spokeswoman for Florida Citrus, and she basically helped mainstream the Florida orange industry. What she did was she found out in I think 1977 that Miami-Dade County in Florida had passed without hardly anybody knowing, passed a non-discrimination homosexual law, which they discovered, and this is rarely reported in the media accounts of it now, a gay rights law, as so-called, which would have affected Catholic and Christian and private schools by forbidding them from discriminating, for example, in the hiring of teachers. Well, that means that, say, a Catholic school or a Christian school could be forced to employ a teacher who was openly in a homosexual relationship and could basically propagandize or indoctrinate her students into the acceptance of that lifestyle. So Anita Bryant, this famous celebrity, joined with the Catholic Church and other concerned pro-family advocates and lent her name and her prestige to this fight to overturn this law in Miami-Dade County, which they did by a whopping 70%. Well, so it wasn't even close. And the real issue was religious freedom, because they recognized that you cannot be forced to place homosexual advocates or open homosexuals into child advocacy positions or, jobs, especially where they can interact and propagandize, or worse, to students. So what happened? The local gay activists in Florida, and then it grew to the entire nation, set upon a strategy of demonizing Anita Bryant. They just demonized her to build their power. And even though they lost going down, they effectively destroyed her career. They held protests everywhere she went. Even when her family went on a vacation to try to get away from it, they would show up. They would find out where she was vacationing and protest there. They engaged in economic terrorism against, for example, Florida orange juice. They would destroy orange products in a grocery store. I learned this just researching a gay activist who was proud of it. He admitted it, It was awful, but they took down her career. And here's what's so, I think, impressive about Anita Bryant. She says in her book, and imagine she's got a family, she's got this career. She said, if they thought that if facing a choice between defending God's values and saving my career, I would choose my career, they thought wrong. Now, John-Henry, we've been around a lot of people in this business. We both know that there are precious few businessmen, who will choose to defend the truth on homosexuality as opposed to, even if it might affect their business. Very, very few. And here is this woman who gave it all up because they destroyed her. Because what happened was, because of all these protests wherever she went, and they would also crash her events, she'd have a concert and they would stand up in the middle of the concert and start shouting. Because of these protests, she became too controversial to employ it. They said, oh, this is too much for us. And they started dropping her. They dropped her bookings. Ultimately, she lost Florida Citrus Commission and her sponsorships. She lost almost everything. And then she got divorced. I can imagine all the effect of this on her marriage. And she was ruined. Her career was ruined. And this is why I consider her one of the great heroes, because after she helped defeat the gay rights law in Miami-Dade, several other gay rights laws were defeated. And I think had the pro-family world rallied around her better and protected her, maybe the whole movement, this whole, development of, gay power in the United States and Canada would have changed. But she gave it up. And she said, even at the end, that she made the right decision in defending against that law.
Peter, what's caused you to stick with this fight all these years? You've been and seen this movement grow and grow despite the best efforts of so many in the movement who were trying to fight, especially the heroes, just like in the pro-life movement. Sometimes the greatest heroes are those who have been there, done that, and come out of having an abortion and go and tell their stories. Our Doug Mainwaring, a real warrior on this, is such because he came out of the lifestyle himself, and he knows the harm that it causes, the harm that it causes family, the harm that it causes friends, the harm that it causes your body, and the harm that it causes to souls. And so, he's a hero because he fights it from knowing, and he's been doing it for decades and continues to, as you have. What's your motivation to stick with it despite this hard fight that seems always like it's losing?
I'm one of those guys that my first boss, I worked in the conservative movement since graduating from University of Michigan in the 80s. And my first boss was Reed Irvine, and he was one of those guys who would stick. He founded accuracy in media. He fought media bias before it was cool. And he stuck to it. Sort of like you guys at LifeSite, you guys have stuck to it. And I'm just that kind of a guy. If it's the truth, I'm not going to abandon the truth for convenience or even, it's just not who I am. It's not who you are. And so I basically became an evangelical Christian after college. And after communism sort of fell, I was writing against communism. I went to Central America and wrote about the Sandinistas, which was a Marxist group, which at the time they lost an election. We were there. They lost an election to pro-democratic forces. Later, they grabbed power back. But communism at that time had fallen, sort of. We thought it was gone, but it's, of course, coming back now. I was wondering, well, what am I going to do? It came, and I ended up working for Concerned Women for America, which was a group founded by Beverly LaHaye. And she had me write an article about the homosexual movement, which was kind of growing in power. This is the early 90s. And so I started, I'm a reporter by training. And I said, if I'm going to write about this, I got to go to the source. I want to read the homosexual literature. And that was my downfall, as it were, because once I started researching this, I would go to the gay bookstore in DC. And that was when the gay bookstores were necessary. They're not really needed anymore because all the bookstores are gay bookstores, right? Borders is a gay bookstore. You don't need a special one anymore because, hey, it's all mainstream. I would read about it, and I started seeing, wow, this is an incredibly powerful movement. It's building and building, and it's coming like a freight train, and nobody really knows what the actual truth is about it. And I worked with great people. I don't know if you remember Father John Harvey, great man. He was one of those heroes. I built connections, and I just started basically realizing that I had to devote myself to this fight because it's sort of one that a lot of people don't want to. They agree with it. I would say the typical attitude is people who would pull you aside and say, John-Henry, I agree with you on this homosexuality thing, but I just can't make it the main issue. Well, if you have that times a million, you have a very troubled movement, because unlike the pro-life movement where the average pro-lifer is like, heck yes, I'm going to fight for unborn children. I mean, I personally have a Down syndrome brother. I know what abortion is. It's eliminating people for convenience sake. And unfortunately, Down's kids often are considered inconvenient, and out they go. And my brother has been an incredible blessing to me and our family. He's almost like an angel of God. Unlike the pro-life movement, where most pro-lifers can articulate easily, some better than others, why we must defend the most innocent and defenseless amongst us, who are being victimized basically because of, like I said, mostly for convenience sake, although there are harder cases as well. The homosexual issue doesn't have so much feel goods. Usually it's an alien issue. And then many times now we see, as I alluded to earlier, the coming out strategy, this idea that we all know somebody who's gay. And so that makes it people feel like, well, I can't really talk about it because I have a cousin, or I have a brother, or I have a son who's gay. And so I can't talk about it. That's called jamming, by the way, a gay activist strategy. When you feel like you can't talk about the truth, you're effectively jammed. And that was a conscious strategy developed by these guys in a book called After the Ball. For whatever reason, most people don't want to talk forthrightly or directly about this issue. And so I felt this needed to be defended. And so I started back in the 90s with a thing called my publication called the NAMBLA Report. We broke a big story about pedophilia. we found out that a major international organization had pedophile groups as its members. And so that led to passage of a law which banned giving U.S. taxpayer dollars to any organization that had pedophile groups, pedophile advocates, as members. Ever since that time, I basically don't feel I can quit because the other side doesn't just not quit, but it continues to grow and grow. And as I said earlier, they've got these groups, which are multi-million-dollar organizations. The CEOs are making, oh my goodness, over $400,000 plus dollars, and to promote immorality as a profession. And if those groups exist and they're not being diminished, they're only growing, and they have the media at their side, the power of the media with them, because the media is effectively a part of the homosexual activist, transgender activist movement, then I feel like, how can I step away? How can LifeSite quit this struggle if the other side is moving ahead with such demonic power?
For us anyway, it's always been so easy to talk about because we come at things from a Catholic or Christian perspective. And from that perspective, it's all about love. I love my brothers and sisters who are trapped in a homosexual lifestyle enough to tell them this behavior hurts you, and it hurts your body, and it hurts your mind, and it hurts your soul. And the last thing I want to see happen to you is that you're separated from God for eternity. And so, yeah, it might be unpopular. It might be condemned by a lot of people, but I love you enough to tell you anyway. And so that's, I think when the motivation is still love, even though in the pro-life movement, it's more clear because there's a victim that everybody can tell is a victim.
Right.
And yet with homosexuality, it's like, you can't say there's an actual victim. There is anyway. The victim is all those who are duped into this lifestyle.
Remember the AIDS plague. This was tied directly to homosexual practice. And today, I don't think there's probably 1 in 100 conservative people under 30 who even know what happened. Literally tens of thousands of self-identified gay men, some weren't self-identified, died in the prime of their life from practicing not just this, but it was a factor, penetrative homosexual sodomy, led to these men being wiped out. And of course, you're absolutely right, physically, of course, but our souls. You're absolutely right. We have to love people enough to tell them the truth. And I've had the privilege of getting to know many people like Doug, many people who've come out of homosexuality. And the idea that you are somehow intrinsically gay by identity or transgender or name your perversion identity, because now there's literally dozens and dozens. Because if you have to accept one aberrant lifestyle, well, why not 50? How can the person who says that homosexuality is okay, normal, how can they deny the polyamorous or the pansexual or the non-binary? Deviance begets deviance. And so we have to love them. We cannot hate as believers. How can we hate? We needed God's grace ourselves. Who are we to say we're better than anybody else? However, we cannot countenance sin. And we certainly cannot countenance sin attached to a core identity when our identity is in Christ. And we can't allow marriage to be commingled and identified with something that God calls an abomination, which is translated as detestable. We must remember that it was a taboo. It was something abhorrent. And I got to hand it to the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church pronounces that in its teachings. The sad part is so many Catholics don't even know the teaching of the Church on this issue.
Well, lots of work to do still. And, the battle in the end is the Lord's, and we're called to be foot soldiers in it, trying to do our best. But Peter, thank you for your great work. Keep doing it. And it's still beautiful, and it continues because you do it out of love. And that is really the only way to go. And it's also the answer to those who think, oh, you're a hater. Well, actually, if I was such a hater, I wouldn't care about these guys. But we do.
When they call me a hater, I ask them, do you hate me? And sometimes they're honest, like, yeah, I hate you, but you don't hate me, I don't hate you. We can disagree on morality, but you're absolutely right about the number one focus of our work is it's the souls of people. And so many are jeopardized when we see 1 in 5 young people and more identifying as LGBT. That is a national crisis, which I think politicians and faith leaders need to talk about more. when so many young people are confused about something so important. We need to step up our game.
Peter LaBarbera, thank you so very much. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you. And thank you for all your great work, John-Henry.
And God bless all of you. And we'll see you next time.
Aloha, everyone. This is Jason Jones for LifeSite News. We hope you enjoyed this video. For more content like this, check the link in the description. You can also connect with us on social media to stay up to date with the latest news on life, faith, family, and freedom. Thanks for watching, and may God bless you.